Minato Namikaze has always been busted. Like, if I'm being honest, there's nothing really that special that sets him apart from other shinobi. Well, I mean in certain terms. He has no Kekkei Genkai, no Dojutsu. He's just kind of vanilla as a shinobi. But the thing that's so impressive about him is that despite this, he was still one of the greatest shinobi to ever live, and one of the greatest Hokage to ever exist. While Hashirama Senju and Tobirama were a threat to Hiruzen, never forget that when Orochimaru pulled up the coffin that said 4th on it, that's when Hiruzen began shaking in his boots. So to take this respectfully vanilla shinobi from nowhere, who was already as OP as could be, and including him in the Uchiha Clan only sees his full potential skyrocket. So let's continue on and see where this story will take our hero. What'll change? Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you're subscribed, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. As bombs exploded in the darkness, a shadow jumped, as quick as a bolt of lightning. It was followed by another shadow, and two more. The whistling of rockets rising and falling, distant artillery, and the clang of weapons as they clashed together could be heard. Battle cries, cries of pain, and echoes of death could be heard from the farthest corners of the forests and mountain ranges that extended out before them. Their garb dark and green, they stayed in the shadows. As they moved, Jiraiya spoke. "That's been another mile. Mark." Minato would touch a tree trunk. This was one of the strategies they had thought up together. Since Minato's time training with Jiraiya, he had learned many techniques. More recently, one passed down to him from Hiruzen, who had learned it straight from its source, Tobirama Senju. This technique was the Flying Raijin Jutsu. It allowed the user to functionally teleport to any location, so long as a marker was there to set it apart. Minato had been tagging trees every mile, so that should they need a quick exit, they could teleport there. The best news was that at any time, Minato could teleport straight home with his team. So if anyone was wounded, he could get them immediately to the hospital. This technique was one of the best space-time jutsu that one could learn, and Minato loved it so much that his team complained that it had basically become his whole personality. The black flash of the leaf. That's what Minato was called, and this technique only seemed to match his moniker even more. Every time he used it, his entire body would be coated in black lightning, and suddenly he'd be somewhere else. One might mistake this for pure speed, which only furthered his legend among the other villages, but instead it used the unique properties of chakra to bend the very fabric of reality around him and warp him from one location to another at incredible speed. This was a very hard technique to learn, and it seemed that very few had the capacity to use it by themselves at all. So the fact that Minato could use it on his own made him a very valuable asset on the battlefield. And due to his abilities, he and Jiraiya had come up with a strategy that would allow Minato to use it to their greatest advantage. After putting down his mark, Minato would keep moving with the rest of his team. Moving deeper into enemy lines, Team 6 was supposed to sabotage an Iwagakure weapons cache located somewhere in the valley under the farthest mountain, and currently, they were nearing that location. Minato looked back at Jiraiya, who raised his hand. "What do you see?" Jiraiya said, without letting a sound come out of his mouth. Minato mouthed, "The weapons cache," while hand-signing a tent and weapons. Jiraiya jumped from the limb he was on to the one Minato was standing on. Minato stepped further back toward the point where the limb and the tree trunk connected. This would hopefully lessen the amount of strain put on the limb, allowing it to hopefully bear all 338 pounds of their combined weight, not even counting the gear, which probably brought it up another 8 pounds at least. Jiraiya looked down and saw many tents, each possessing a lot of weaponry. There were guards everywhere. It seemed that there was no way for them to get through it all. They could fight, but that might draw the entirety of Iwa's forces toward them, which wouldn't be a very good idea. Jiraiya looked back at Ko and Dekai. "Get up here." They both jumped to a tree limb opposite Jiraiya and Minato. Jiraiya then spoke. "To avoid arousing suspicion, we're gonna need to disguise ourselves. Pick out a target for each of you. One close to the perimeter that nobody'll notice. Rope dart them, and then shapeshift into them. From there, we'll each take a single section of the camp, and go about placing paper bombs in with the weapons." Ko and Dekai nodded. They got into position. "Do you have your targets?" Jiraiya whispered. Minato, Ko, and Dekai nodded. "Then execute." Jiraiya tossed his rope dart and grabbed an Iwan in close to the edge and pulled him toward them. It was a perfect execution. Not a single soul noticed. Minato did the same, and while it was a bit more risky than that of his master, it seemed to go off without a hitch. Minato looked up at the life he had just taken and felt a sense of sadness. He had to struggle with himself. Looking at this man, his mind wanted to say he had a family, he had a wife, he had kids, a story. And while each of these things was possibly true, Minato knew he couldn't center on them. He couldn't dwell on it. Ko and Dekai were next. They each threw their rope dart, but they hit a snag when they realized they targeted the exact same victim. The execution was botched and a sound was made. This was enough to draw attention from one of the other Iwanin. Jiraiya cupped his face. "We're dead," he said. "We just died. We're dead." The Iwanin called out. "Is everything all right in there?" he asked. Suddenly, the voice of one of the Iwanin called out, "Yeah, but you should come check this out." As soon as the man came into the woods, he saw the body, but before he could call out, Minato slit his throat. That made 4 bodies. He looked at Ko. "Transform into him." Ko did. Some of the suspicious shinobi drew a little closer to the edge of the woods. "Is everything okay in there?" they asked. Minato and Ko, both disguised, began to exit the woods. "Yeah, I just went out to Wiz and saw some fresh bear tracks. We might want to consider hoisting the food so we don't get raided tonight." The shinobi nodded. "Duly noted." They returned to their post. Jiraiya sighed in relief. Minato had proven exactly why he was his favorite student of the 3. Jiraiya and Dekkai both transformed as well and snuck back into the camp. There were now 4 imposters among us. Meeting together, they divided up the tents between the 4 of them and proceeded to head in that direction. Minato, Jiraiya, Dekkai, and Ko all went their ways and began the act of sabotage. Minato entered a tent. Amazingly, the tent possessed boxes and boxes worth of paper bombs. "Oh, these'll go up nicely." He slipped one of his own into one of the boxes and moved to the next tent. This one was filled with shuriken and kunai. There also seemed to be various polearms in this grouping of weapons. Minato began attaching plenty of paper bombs to these weapons. As soon as he stepped out, though, to head to the next tent, he was caught by an Iwa officer. "What are you doing?" the officer asked, his face displaying a suspicion as to what and why Minato was doing what he was doing. Minato spoke. "I was running to check on the weapons. I was counting them." "No, you weren't," the officer said. "I know you weren't, because that's what I'm supposed to be doing." Minato felt his blood run cold. The Iwanin seemed to swell up in front of him. "I'm going to ask you again. What were you doing?" Minato looked down. "I was counting them, sir. Not because I was asked to." "Why were you counting them?" the officer asked. Minato looked up, putting on the best puppy dog impression he could, deriving true nervousness from the situation, but saying it was by a new cause. "The leaf's getting close, and He looked away. "I'm just a little scared." The officer seemed to pull back a little. "Why are you scared? You're an Iwanin. An Iwa ninja can handle anything." Minato nodded. He thought about things in Konoha, about Kushina, about the future he hoped to have. "I have a girlfriend at home. I'm worried that I'm not going to be able to see her again. I'm a little jumpy. I needed something to calm my nerves, to take my mind off my anxiety. I hope I'm not causing an issue." The officer sighed. He handed Minato the clipboard. "Fine. If you're gonna count, then count. Make sure you note how many crates we have, and of what." Minato nodded. "I will, sir," he said, taking the clipboard. As the officer walked away, Minato suppressed the urge to sigh in relief, fearing he may be noticed if he did. He continued to enter various tents. As he did, he was sure to stick them with tags and then write down the contents. This would give him an alibi if he was discovered again. Eventually, he tagged everything. Exiting, he headed back to the officer and handed him the clipboard. "This was everything I counted." The officer looked it over and patted him on the shoulder. "Good job." He pulled out a flask of whiskey. "Take this for your troubles. Drink it in moderation for your nerves' sake. And if anyone asks, you didn't get it from me." Minato smiled. "Thank you, sir." As the man walked away, Minato sat the flask down for fear it might secretly have a tracking device on it. Making his way back to the forest, he let off his shape transformation jutsu and waited. Jiraiya was next, followed by Ko, who got there only a couple seconds earlier than Dekkai. "Are we ready?" Jiraiya asked. They nodded. Minato couldn't help but think about what he was doing. He was about to blow up the Iwanin's camp and that officer. He knew that the kindly officer who did well by him would be killed. Jiraiya looked at Minato. "Are you ready, Minato?" Minato looked over at Jiraiya, the look in his eye telling Jiraiya everything. "Do we have to do this, Jiraiya? A lot of people are going to die, and not all of them are evil. Some of them are, well, just like us." Jiraiya looked down sadly. "It's good that this matters to you, Minato. It means your mind isn't blinded to the suffering of the people affected by this war, but I'm afraid we have to." "I'm gonna feel bad about it," Minato said. Jiraiya nodded. "We all have to do things sometimes that won't let us sleep well at night. But we have a responsibility to our village, just as these people have to theirs. While I do this, feeling a heart of sorrow, I know that they would do the same to me in a heartbeat. And if they did it to me, I wouldn't be angry at them. After all, they have their responsibilities too. This is why war is a tragedy. Sometimes we demonize our enemy to desensitize ourselves to the actions we take. I think it's a defense mechanism. But in the end, it doesn't change what we have to do. Can you do it, Minato? For your village?" Minato nodded. As they looked back at the camp, Minato took a sigh of displeasure. Jiraiya counted them down. 3, 2, 1, ignition! They all raised their fingers up in a half ram symbol. With this, the entire camp went up in an explosion. Using the flying Raijin, they all appeared on a high tree about a mile away. They got out their binoculars to look at what happened. The entire camp had gone up, and it seemed that half of the mountain's face was now set ablaze. "I think that's mission accomplished," Jiraiya said, lowering his binoculars. Looking over to the right, though, he noticed in the tree opposite them, 2 shinobi had climbed up to take a look at the commotion themselves, and they weren't Konoha-nin. The 2 shinobi, conscious of what Team 6 had done, jumped from their tree to Team Jiraiya's tree, getting into a scuffle with them that brought them down to the ground. As they rolled, they managed to break free of the shinobi. "Who are they?" Minato asked. Jiraiya, now having a clearer view of them, knew exactly who they were. "That's Roshi and Han of Iwagakure. They're the Jinchuriki of the 4 Tails and 5 Tails. They're the ultimate weapons of Iwagakure. What are they doing here?" Jiraiya then realized that they stumbled upon a secret counter-offensive that they didn't have any intel on. Han and Roshi were there to lay waste to the western front. Jiraiya looked at Minato. "Minato, do you have the coordinates ready? We need to get out of here as fast as we can." Minato nodded. The team got very close to Minato just as Roshi and Han were forming tailed beast bombs to destroy them. As the balls were launched, Minato grabbed his team and shouted out, "Flying Raijin Jutsu!" Suddenly, they were teleported to another tree a mile away, where they saw the end result of the tailed beast bombs. The sound of the explosion finally caught up with them, along with the concussive wave. "They just tac-nuked the entire forest," Ko shouted in terror. "We've got Jinchuriki on the ground. We need to get to the western front and let them know about this." "Aren't they currently engaged in battle against Suna?" Minato asked. Jiraiya nodded. "Yes, they are. This is why we need to let them know that Han and Roshi are in play. If they get flanked, and they release tailed beast bombs of a size like that, we could see the decimation of the entire 109th Division." Minato's eyes widened. "That's Fugaku's division." Jiraiya nodded. At about that time, they saw the sudden rise of 2 beasts, one that looked like a horse and another that looked like a gorilla. "We need to hurry," Jiraiya said, knowing that those beasts could catch up to where they are now in a matter of moments. Using Minato's flying Raijin jutsu, they teleported all the way back to the front lines. There they found Fugaku, who was serving under the commander of the 109th Division, his father, clan head Usagi Uchiha. Serving as the clan head since the time of Madara's departure, Usagi had been a well-respected leader in Konoha since long before even the First Shinobi World War. Taking on the role at a young age, he was the only remaining member of Madara's direct bloodline through a cousin who managed to survive the war. Or at least that's what Usagi claimed. Whether this was true or not was not to be seen, but most of the Uchiha respected him as the leader of their clan, and as such, he was recognized by Konoha too. Jiraiya rushed in to talk to Usagi about this as Minato came to Fugaku. "Fu, we need to get men ready. There's about to be an attack." Fugaku was surprised. "What do you mean?" Minato began to explain that on their way back from the mission, they came across Han and Roshi, both of which were heading in the direction of the 109th. Fugaku was shocked. It was at about then that his father came out of the tent. "Get the rear guard. Prepare for battle." "You can't," Jiraiya said. "You'll be facing off against the 2 flaming hammers of the stone. They have the destructive potential to completely annihilate you and everyone else here. Don't underestimate the power of the Uchiha. Rear guard to stations." It was then that the forces of the 109th Division moved to cover the north while the front lines to the west continued their scuffle with the sand. Jiraiya and the rest of Team 7 stood there by the tree line and watched. As they did, ready for war, they heard the distant cry of large monsters. The very ground reverberated with the sound of thuds, massive weight being applied to the ground quickly and powerfully, signifying a sprint. Minato began to sweat as he thought about these things. The sheer power of a tailed beast was enough to send a shiver down any man's spine, but to face off against 2 at the same time? Minato was wondering how so many were keeping it together. Looking over at Usagi, standing there valiantly, a face full of surety, he wondered what the man might have planned. Minato looked forward. The thuds were getting stronger, meaning they were getting closer. The roars began to shake the very heavens, prompting some shinobi below to cover their ears to protect them. Suddenly, snapping the trees like so many twigs, Kokuo came sliding to a halt. Opening its mouth, it released a stream of pure steam, so hot that it might boil the skin right off your body. But before the steam could hit them, they were suddenly covered by a translucent wall made from all the colors of the rainbow. Minato was shocked. "Is this?" Suddenly, a few Uchiha standing in the front began to walk forward toward the beast. They formed their own specific colored chakra around them, developing a large armored avatar. "That's the Susanoo," Minato said, having only read about it in a book. His eyes sparkled with joy, having forgotten to be afraid. This technique was the ultimate technique of the Uchiha, and currently, about 5 Uchiha were facing off against Kokuo with their Susanoo. Ethereal shields and swords formed from every side, striking back at the tailed beast. "This is impressive," Jiraiya said, seeing how well they'd got the battle under control. But something feels wrong. Where's... Suddenly, Son Goku appeared from the trees. By which I mean the Four Tails, not the Saiyan. The beast let out a roar and fired a tailed beast ball. One of the Susanoo saw it coming and parried with their shield, sending the orb flying in another direction. It landed elsewhere and exploded. Two of the Susanoo facing Kokuo peeled off to face the Four Tails as well, but considering how strong both tailed beasts were, it began to become a bit more dicey. One more Susanoo peeled off to help the others against Son Goku, whose physical strength was something beyond that of Kokuo's. The Susanoo remaining with Kokuo seemed to try to just hold back its charge, while other shinobi of the 109th raced past them to start flinging paper bombs at its feet. Kokuo stumbled back with a roar, nearly going over. It turned and began to release steam from its mouth. Its breath was so hot that those caught in the steam completely evaporated with nothing but a shrill cry. Seeing this, Minato felt as if he could never make tea again. The steam, the screams, it all sounded like the world's most evil tea brewing. But with Kokuo's charge halted, the Susanoo could go on a counter-offensive, striking it in the side of the face with their swords, pushing it back. It tried to form a tailed beast ball, but one of the Susanoo shoved their sword into its mouth, popping the sphere before it could charge more, blowing Kokuo back with its own blast. Usagi smiled. "See what I told you? We Uchiha are not to be underestimated." It was then that there was screaming behind them. Usagi turned around to see what the commotion was. The western line had broken. They were retreating. What in the world? Konoha-nin were retreating, followed by Suna-nin chasing them with their weapons to bear. It was then that from the tree line, a third-tailed beast appeared. Shukaku, the one-tail. Usagi's face grew pale. Rushing out to face it, he cried out, "Hold the line!" He summoned his own Susanoo. It clashed with Shukaku. The beast roared as Usagi growled and insulted it with every strike. "Weak! Useless!" His sword collided with the beast, sending sand flying everywhere. "Lesser of all beasts!" He brought the sword down upon its head, but instead of stunning the beast's head and then body contorted around the sword and climbed up the Susanoo. Usagi was confused at first, but then he realized this was the technique that the Susanoo couldn't escape. "Sand coffin," he spoke in realization. At that moment, Shukaku squeezed as tightly as possible, shattering the Susanoo, killing its pilot. Fugaku saw this and felt his heart run cold. "Father!" he cried out. He rushed forward to stop Shukaku personally, to avenge the man who gave him life. But before he could, Minato grabbed him. "Fugaku, stop!" Fugaku turned back, his eyes filled with tears. Sharingan evolved into Mangekyo. "I have to avenge him." "No," Minato said. "The line's broken, and we're surrounded by tailed beasts. There's no winning, there's only survival. We need to get out of here." Minato, taking charge, called out. "Reform the line," he shouted, but shinobi continued to flee. Minato, pulling out his special daggers, threw them. They collided with many Suna-nin. As those shinobi went down, Minato used his flying Raijin to get between the Konoha-nin and the Suna. "Regroup!" he commanded so loudly that he blew out his voice. He tried to defend his people as best he could, but with Shukaku coming and Usagi perishing to the beast's might, there was no consoling them. Shukaku began to throw spikes made of sand at the Konoha shinobi, skewering many of them. Minato cried for everyone to gather near him. Jiraiya began to call for it as well. Some turned and began to run in his direction. Minato turned back to the fleeing shinobi. "Come back! I'm pulling us out!" he shouted. Some turned back and others kept fleeing for their lives. As the defensive lines around them broke, the Susanoo looked back, their pilots giving a nod telling him to leave them behind. Suddenly, Shukaku let loose another volley. "Watch out!" Minato felt himself knocked over for just a moment, just as a sand spike was set to collide with him. Ko took the shot and went down himself. Minato cried out. He pulled him up. Ko gasped. "Minato, get us out!" he shouted. Minato looked up. "Everyone grab hands," he demanded. Everyone did just that. Minato struggled and strained. He expended as much chakra as he possibly could, and in that moment he teleported the whole company back to Konoha. Hitting the village center, the crowds were shocked. Minato, having spent all the chakra he had, fell to the side. "Minato!" Ko shouted as he reached out for his brother. He then became acutely aware of how wounded he was when an overwhelming pain seized him. Ko cried out. Jiraiya rushed to their side. "Get a doctor!" Minato felt the consciousness leaving him. Laying there, in the darkness, Minato lingered in the empty void of his own mind. No dreams, nothing. How long he was out, he didn't know, but what he recalled after was awakening in a hospital room, laying in a hospital bed. Opening his eyes, he saw a soft afternoon light entering the room. As his senses came back to him, he noticed that his right hand was in contact with something. Looking down, he saw Kushina there, holding his hand. She was speaking, but he couldn't make out what she was saying. It was muffled. Slowly, his hearing adjusted as the rest of his brain began to awaken. "Mater?" Kushina let out a sigh of relief. "You're okay." You scared the heck out of me, Minato. Minato looked around. He then jolted in remembrance. Ko! Where's Ko? He demanded, sitting up. Kushina tried to stop him. Minato, wait! Minato got out of his bed regardless, almost falling. Kushina ran around the side to help him, but he was almost to the door. Minato, stop! I gotta help Ko, he shouted as he got to the door. Ko's dead, Kushina shouted. Minato's grip on the handle tightened. He looked back at her. What? Kushina looked down and rubbed her temples. She had planned to explain it to him in a softer way, but he was in a state of panic, and he might have hurt himself if she hadn't stopped him. Minato, come back here, she said. Sit down. What did you say about Ko? He asked. Kushina sighed and looked up, knowing that this was going to be perhaps the hardest thing she had ever said. You've been out for a few days. During that time, the doctors tried to save Ko, but they couldn't stop the bleeding. The wound was too big. Ko was conscious for 5 minutes before he passed out, and after that, he survived another 30. He died during surgery, she said. Minato felt his legs go out from under him as he fell to the ground. No, that's not true. It can't be, he said. She came to his side and hugged him. Minato, it's me, Mater. You know me. I wouldn't joke about something like this, she said. I know it's hard, but it's true. Minato would slowly begin to fall to tears. The realization that Ko had passed away was enough to awaken Minato's Mangekyo Sharingan. It wasn't easy for Minato after that. Minato would be released just in time to attend the funeral. He was there with his father and mother, though he stood apart from them. He stood apart from everyone. He felt so isolated, like he didn't deserve to be in the presence of his parents. Ko was their youngest son, Minato's little brother. It was Minato's job to protect him, and yet he could do nothing. Dekkai attended the funeral with Jiraiya, and though Jiraiya wanted to comfort Minato, and Dekkai even set out to, both came to realize that what he needed wasn't comfort right now, but solitude. Kushina, watching from afar, stood close by, but when Minato finally left the grave and she attempted to approach, he just walked right past her. Kushina watched him leave. Minato took the long road home in hopes of avoiding his parents. That being said, they shared the same house, so it would be hard to avoid them forever. Kushina would make her way to the house. Walking in, she would see Minato's parents sitting by the dining room table. She walked in and over to them. Mr. and Mrs. Uchiha, I offer my starkest condolences to you for the loss of your son. Minato's mother, being ever so kind, thanked her for the gesture with a smile. Her heart was shattered, but she was still a kind-hearted woman. If you're looking for Minato, I believe I saw him go upstairs earlier. Kushina thanked her and turned to leave. Also, if you talk with him, will you please tell him that we love him? Kushina nodded. I will. She came to the stairs and began to climb them. Once she reached the top, she started to look around for Minato. She would enter the spare bedroom and see him sitting in the darkness on a beanbag chair. She came in and knelt down beside him. Minato, are you okay? You know, when Jiraiya tried to recruit me for Team 6, I didn't want to go, Minato said. Kushina cocked her head to the side. Minato? Minato began twiddling his thumbs. I was sitting right here, in this chair, doing this exact same thing when I told him about it. He understood my struggle, told me to take the position, and yet I didn't want to. I didn't want to leave him behind. Sometimes I wish I had. Why? Kushina asked. Because if he hadn't joined Team 6 with me, maybe he wouldn't have been there. Then it would have been you who died, Minato. I hope so, Minato said. Kushina shook her head. Ko didn't have to do what he did. He did it because he loved you and wanted to see you live. I wanted to see him live, Minato said. I know. That's the pain of two brothers willing to die for the other. Neither want their brother to die for them. Minato was close to breaking down. I didn't want to leave him behind. I didn't want to lose him. I didn't want him to go away, Minato said. Kushina then spoke. He isn't gone, Minato. Even if he's far away from you, he's still a part of you. He'll always be with you. And with this, Minato remembered what Ko had told him that day, telling him to go to train with Jiraiya anyway. Ko told Minato that no matter how far away they were, they would always be together. And at this, Minato began to cry. Kushina did her best to comfort him. From that point on, the war began to heat up. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru were called away to the Western Front, where they were supposed to break up the lines between Iwa and Suna through the defeat of Hanzo the Salamander, the leader of Amagakure, the village without sunshine. As the tailed beasts had gotten involved, rumors stirred that Kushina was going to have to go into the war. Minato, having already lost Ko, did not wish to lose Kushina as well, especially knowing how very little control she had over the Ninetales. The moment she left the village and had to call on the power of the Ninetales, it would be over for her. So he worked to ensure that if ever a time for that came, she would have a secret weapon. That secret weapon was the technique he'd been working on from the point of Ko's death until now, the Rasengan. He would eventually teach it to her, but she told him that with his love, she'd be able to handle it. But thankfully, such a time never came. The Second Shinobi World War came to an end, and peace returned to the world. As scarred as Minato was, he was just glad peace had returned, and Kushina would not have to deal with the war. V-Day. That was the day he dropped to one knee and made the decision to spend the rest of his life with her. "Mater," he said, looking up at her, "from the day I met you, I couldn't take my eyes off that beautiful red hair. While others made fun of it and picked on you because of it, I had never seen anything more beautiful. You were self-conscious about it, but I found it to be one of your many best features." Taking her hand, he kissed it. "Kushina, I don't have a ring yet, but I can't wait a moment longer. I have to ask you, will you marry me?" Eyes overrunning with tears, she fell to her knees and hugged him. "Yes, Minato, I will marry you," she said. Finally cementing their love with the vow of marriage, Minato and Kushina began their new life together. Minato would show Jiraiya the ninjutsu he completed, and due to the many feats of heroism Minato had accomplished over the course of the war, as well as the Rasengan, an A-rank jutsu, Minato would finally be brought up to the rank of Jonin. And just as Jiraiya had done for him, Minato would do for others. Kakashi Hatake, Obito Uchiha, and Rin Nohara would be placed under his care. This was the birth of Team Minato, and the start of Minato's time as a mentor of his own. But sadly, hard times were on the horizon. Though the Second Shinobi World War had only just ended, a third was on the horizon. But Minato was going to be ready to meet it, this time with his own team. And that's where I plan to stop for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. I have at least one more episode planned, and I hope you'll be there with me. That being said, I find myself in a predicament. Minato has a Mangekyo Sharingan now, and I have no techniques to give to it. Oh, what's an Amagi to do? I know. Why don't you all come up with some techniques for this Mangekyo Sharingan? The ones that I like the most will probably be the ones I feature in the episode, so be sure to leave a comment below and tell us what you want for Minato's Sharingan abilities. Whoever's abilities get chosen, I will give a special shout out to at the start of the video, so be sure to brainstorm hard. Remember to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and all that other good stuff. Until next time, peace out.